As I've mentioned to a few of you, I consider XAML easily the most powerful markup on the planet, as Jen said in my introduction, and I really have enjoyed using it for now 12 years, delivering great, compelling applications to my clients. Many of them claim that it has changed their entire way of dealing with their users because they're able to present their users with something that fits their job so well. And I'm very, very happy to see the possibility of now being able to use it on lots of different platforms and not having to fall back on. I wrote a PWA, a Progressive Web App, last fall. I found it an unsatisfying experience, let me put it to you that way. I know there are people who really like that technology, but I understand there are people who find the whole HTML5 JavaScript thing maybe a little bit problematic. I know that my good friend David Neal sells a T-shirt on Amazon that kind of expresses my feeling, and maybe some of you would look at it the same way. And I also had trouble, kind of CSS just doesn't seem to do what I want it to. And I understand that a lot of people use those technologies and they get some pretty good apps out. But without apology, I think we can do better in the XAML world because we have some capabilities that those other platforms really don't. XAML is designed from scratch to be very highly compositional, meaning we have very fine-grained pieces with narrow responsibilities, and we combine those in various interesting ways. And the combinatorics of that mean we have this huge space of possibilities. Basically, in the XAML world, we've discovered over the course of 10 or 12 years that if we can sketch something and show it to a user on paper, no matter how out of the box or non-rectangular, no matter how advanced it is as a UI, we are able to build it in XAML. And that, to me, speaks to the power. But people do have trouble with it, I find, because of this compositional nature. It's not like the kinds of user interface stacks that you've used in the past. For example, if you do Windows forms, you drag big old chunks out of the toolbox. And you do compose a UI, in a sense, with those big chunks. But the chunks don't interact with one another in any meaningful ways. And they don't really have very deep levels of containment. So the space that you can explore with those Windows forms controls is fairly narrow. You can do better with HTML, actually, with divs and iframes and things like that. But it's not built, wasn't originally designed with that compositional nature in mind, and that means that above a certain level of complexity, it begins to get very hard to get what you want out of it. I'm going to do an example today of something that is just drop dead easy in XAML that I think would probably be pretty hard in most web technologies. This compositional nature of XAML is facilitated in various ways. One is that things go inside other things, so that you don't go looking for a property to scroll a stack panel. Stack panel doesn't have such a property. When I teach XAML training classes, I talk about the fact stack panels are actually pretty dumb. All they know how to do is stack things up. They don't know how to draw a border around themselves. They don't know how to scroll the stack. Other parts of XAML are used for that. And I think most people that use XAML for a while kind of get into that idea at a very basic level. And you begin to understand the idea of things inside things. But my experience has been 90% of the people I see doing XAML development don't really push it. They don't really leverage the compositional nature as much as they should to get really powerful UI. And I'd like to show you some examples today, explain how they're built. Because the other things that we can do is binding. We can make part-to-part attachments that facilitate composition. We can do layering of things, compositing. This is one of the things that I really don't see people do much. I think because previous user interface technologies, up through HTML4 and Windows Forms and all the things that came before it, the rendering engines really didn't support layering. And now our engines do, so we can use that. And of course, templating. Most XAML developers do use templating at what I think of as a minimal level, but I'd like to show you some things that maybe will open up your mind a little bit to what you can do with templates in a compositional way. So, as I mentioned, most people only use a small fraction here. I want you to switch to this compositional mindset. That's the purpose of this session. The shift is very similar to the shift from an object-oriented language to a functional language. So if you're moving from C# or Java into something like Erlang or F#, the way you go about thinking about putting languages to accomplish what you want, putting code to accomplish what you want, is different. You have to shift your thinking. If you don't, you will ineffectively use the tool you're not familiar with. You'll try to impose the patterns from what you've done before on that particular technology, and you won't get optimal results. The same thing is true in XAML, and I think that's why a lot of people don't get optimal results. They're taking the thought patterns from what they used in other technologies and trying to shoehorn them into XAML, and you can see it in the kind of XAML they create. So we talked about some of the ways that you can compose. I might as well build this. The content model. The basic idea with the content model is that you're able to, that a lot of controls don't really take care of what's inside of themselves. A button, for example, a button is dumb. All a button knows how to do is get clicked. A button does not know how to display its interior. I mean, that sounds odd to people who haven't thought about it this way, but the button's content means that the button delegates the ability to show its visual appearance to something else, another fine-grained piece, or a combination of other pieces. Now, you look at, for example, if you look at Windows Forms and the classic VB and Power Builder and things like that, if you look at a button in those technologies, they never did really get the whole text and image on a button thing quite right. They made some stabs at it, but they never did a good job. And the reason why is that in order for that to work in those technologies, there would have to be an entire rendering layout engine inside the button control. And that's obviously not, that's a silly way to do it. But in XAML, the button doesn't have to know how to do layout because it can delegate that. So we compose a button based on content that is injected that the engine knows how to render. The button doesn't care what the content looks like. But I find that even when people kind of get that idea, they don't really push it as far as they should. I'm going to build an entire little Uno project here. I don't know if has anybody so far actually started from scratch and built something? If so, I did not see it. So we'll do a simple little project here. Let's create a new project. And it's going to be on the Uno platform. And we'll call it Button Content Live. So for those of you who haven't really played very much with the product, this is basically what you go to get a new project out there. And in this project, I'm going to use something called a toggle switch, which is part of the UWP command set. A toggle switch allows you to turn something on or off. Yeah. Don't worry about it. It's fine. Someday I'll get everything all up to date. But about the time that I have collected Medicare for 5 or 6 years. So a toggle switch has actually not just a content property. Button has content, just one property. A toggle switch has two. It has on content and off content. So when you turn it on, there's one content that shows. When you turn it off, there's another. Well, now we've got our stuff set up here. So let's go to the shared section, get that main page up there. And just to kind of give you an idea of what I'm trying to do here, let's get a little more room. I'm going to stick that text block that is put in there by default. I'll get rid of that. And put in the toggle switch. You could drag it in from the toolbox if you wanted to. So it's got on content and off content. And of course, you can just set that to a string if you like. As a matter of fact, let's just show it that way because that'll sort of see the evolution of things. Okay, so let's say that I'm dealing in this case with animals. When it's on, that means they're alive, and when it's off, that means they're dead. Okay, that looks pretty good. I mean, that'll work just fine. And if we kind of zoom in on that, you'll actually see. Let's go up to a little higher, maybe 200% here, and find my form. You know, I'm told that they're going to fix this sometime in a future Visual Studio, so you don't have to cast around so much to find things like this. So there's alive and dead, and you can actually see that if the default is off, so that if I set the is on, I think, property to true, oops, then we see that it goes alive and it switches. But we don't have to just use strings. Content means that we can put anything in there. So when I was at the client, where this example first came up, they do cattle management. And there was an app where they needed to show whether a cow was alive or dead. And so this is the way they decided to go about it. Let's take, what are you griping about? Oh, you're fine. So let's take out the way the content's done there. And instead, let's set some more interesting content for the toggle switch. Yeah, toggle switch on content right there. And toggle switch off content. I'll open up room for both of them and then go get what I'm going to put in there. Off content. Now, we decided that the best way to indicate that an animal is alive or dead is if an animal is alive, it stands up. But if it's dead, we just decided we'd turn it upside down. Does that make sense as a visualization? See, we want a visualization that's easy for the user to see. That they don't need any training or anything, that it's not hard, they don't have to parse out text, because that's what makes a good user experience. Well, how do I get a cow and turn him upside down? Well, our good folks at SyncFusion have a little free product called Metro Studio. And it has a lot of shapes in vector form. So when I was doing this for the client, I just went over there and said, yeah, let me get a cow. And there is one. And now let's get the XAML that represents that cow. Right here. And now I'm going to go back to the back to my Visual Studio. I'm going to drop that in the on content. So we've got a cow standing upside down as the on content there. I do have to, there are a few syntactical things I have to take care of. It puts some stuff in there that I don't need. It doesn't work with UWP either, so, or even WPF. I have to take that stuff out. So now, we've got the on content. We can also put the same thing in for the off content, but we can use one of those little pieces that we can manipulate called a transform. So again, we'll get rid of this nasty stuff here that we don't need. And we've got a duplicate name there too, so take that out. And now, yeah, there's a name there too. We get rid of all that stuff. Now go down to the transform section and for the off content, tell it that we want to switch that scale in the scale transform to a -1. That basically just flips it upside down. So now, if we run this thing, even on, well, it's like a while to run on Droid. I may start it in a minute, but I'm going to do it in UWP for speed. But I've tested it on Droid. It works just fine. And so when it builds, we'll be able to see it actually be able to flip back and forth. Are you going now? Oh, no, I got to start you there, don't I? So this kind of UI can be much more intuitive, but if you don't, first of all, start with sketching some things out and figuring out what makes sense to the user instead of just dragging crap onto a screen until you think you got enough. If you think about what you want to do and you use some of the interesting compositional capabilities, then you'll end up with something that is a lot more intuitive to the user, and they really like it when you do that. It continues to surprise me. 20 years after I started doing this, the littlest things that you do that tells a user that you understand how they think and you understand something about their job, the littlest things really light them up. So now I have a cow, and he can be alive or he can be dead. And you can imagine that in a list of cows, I've got, the alive and dead bound off to some field in a database that says whether it's some Boolean that says whether it's alive or dead. And you saw me build it there from scratch in like 4 or 5 minutes. So it doesn't take very long to do these things, and that to me is one of the interesting things about showing how powerful XAML is. It's possible to do that same thing in other technologies like HTML5 and JavaScript. It's probably not possible to do it in 4 or 5 minutes. So many of the things that we can do here it's not just a matter that we can do them, but that it's so much more economically effective to do them that they really become very valuable. Oh, there's the screen caps from the Android version. Another very key compositional technique is layering. In fact, if you've ever been in the printing industry, they talk about compositing layers on top of one another to get a net effect. Well, let's take a look at an example where we use that. This particular application was for a company that I thought I had it up here, but I don't. Is it there? Yeah. This particular application was for a company. They're the leading manufacturer of software, the leading vendor of software for propane delivery management and fuel oil delivery management. What's the cartoon show? Propane and propane accessories. King of the Hill. Yeah, that shop, which is just a fiction there, but in the real world there are thousands of such shops, and a couple of thousand of those shops run these folks' software. So when we were doing their new version, we decided, as part of the sketching, it would be really nice because it would be so easily understandable by the user to do fuel levels in terms of a tank. And we would change the shape of the tank if it were fuel oil versus propane, and change the color of the fuel tank as well. But this was kind of the very first. Took me about 10 minutes to kind of diddle around with pieces and figure out how to do this. So I'm going to go through the pieces here, and then we'll actually look at the XAML. This fuel tank right here, which is bound to this slider here, so I can change the percentage there, you see. It would normally be bound to real data. But let's talk about the layers that make this up. The first layer, the one that's at the very back, is the full round. When the fuel is full, we have this Tylenol capsule shape in light green. That's at the top up there. But that full Tylenol capsule gets clipped by a grid. And the grid clips it to exactly the amount of fuel you've got right now. So that's actually bigger than the grid that it resides in, and the grid clips it. We'll see the XAML for that in just a moment. And then there's another rounded rectangle that represents the outside of the fuel tank. And it's got a stroke, but it doesn't have a fill. And then finally, there is a little rectangle that sits on top and a text block that sits in the middle showing the amount. And so those 5 elements are all there are in that visualization of a fuel tank. Let's take a look at the XAML for this. So if we go down a little bit on the page here, we see, we've got a grid holding some things there. So first we've got, that's the slider. And this internal grid right here, this one is the one that holds those 5 things I talked about earlier. And as you can see, the first thing in it is that rectangle that has the rounded edges and a fill of green-yellow. Now, I actually wrote a control using this technique so that the fuel tank can be any size. Right now, it's hard-coded to a certain size, but in the actual production system, I wrote a control that would let it be completely flexible. But this was good enough for a prototype. So we've got that, and then we've got that's inside the grid. And remember, as I said, that grid has a height that is bound to that slider so it knows how tall it needs to be. And therefore, the grid clips away part of this rounded rectangle. Does that make sense? And then there's the rectangle that has the same rounded nature. And it's got, let's see, where's the... if I got them out, I maybe have them slightly out of the order I thought I did. Oh, there it is. No, that's right. Stroke thickness equals 5. Stroke equals dark gray. But it has no fill. So that's the tank outline. It's the same size as this rectangle up here, but this rectangle is filled with green, and this one just has a stroke of dark gray. And then there's a small rectangle that's positioned up on top. Notice the vertical alignment equal top there. And then a text block that is centered, both vertically and horizontally, and it's bound to the number that's in that slider. And in a real app, it would be bound to a number that came from some data. So this is an example of data visualization and the ability to use the shapes and graphics and colors and the compositional principles of XAML to do good data visualization. Now, I must take issue with my good friend Rocky Laka about something he said. Because he talked about apps having so many CRUD screens. Well, that certainly used to be the case, but in the last 5 years, that has not been the case for us for the most part. Screens that just get data in and out are down to 20-25% of the screens in the apps we build. We build far more data visualization screens now. And one of the reasons why is because we've got data coming from all over the place. Think of that fuel tank level. It's being calculated or read off a gauge, maybe a wireless gauge, that's got that number. In the modern cloud era, we got data coming from all over the place. Some people have thousands of sensors. We can tap into databases that are on the web. Our need to actually enter data is going down. What's important is visualizing and using data. Because what good is all that data if we can't expose it to the user in a way that they can consume it? And XAML is the most powerful technology I know, general purpose technology for presenting data to people. We can buy data visualization controls, we can buy pie charts and stuff like that, and that's a good first step. I don't mean to denigrate that. But if we're going to give people data visualization in ways that make sense to them instantly the moment that they see it, then we need to be able to craft things like the two things I've shown you and put those into our user interfaces. You guys are very quiet. I don't know if that's good enough. I wasn't trolling for applause. I just, but I'll tell you though, I've presented in Norway and Sweden. You can't even hear those people breathe. They are the quietest audiences I've ever had in the world. So we've talked about content, injecting content into content controls. We've talked about layering. Now let's talk about some interesting uses of binding to do composition. So let me show you the program, and then we'll kind of walk through how it works. All right, and that's this one, isn't it? Yeah. No, it's not that one. Sorry. This one I think is in UWP, and I haven't ported it over to Uno yet, but in general, the ones I've ported so far have been trivial to port. So I don't expect this one to be any harder. So the basic idea here, this was a training exercise that I put in front of people in my class and such. Let's go right to the list of UC. Now, we've got a box at the top, just about what you'd expect. It's got stuff in it, but we've got different templates for it. And the original version of this had just simple template and rich template, but now I've got in that combo box visual thumbnail representations of what the template's going to look like when you choose it. See, I had the original version was just pick the string that represented the template you wanted, and I'm in the middle of a class and somebody said, well, can't you do a preview of the template? Took me about 10 minutes to figure out a way to do it. You guys who are experienced in XAML might be thinking a little bit about how you solve that problem while I walk through it here a little bit. Let's walk through it. So the basic idea is the combo box has got to show a list of the templates that you could choose. Well, okay, that's fine. We need some data classes to hold that. So I've got one right there that holds the description of a template and a pointer to that template. And then I have a collection of those right here. It's just inherits the observable collection, and it has a default selected index so that the combo box will not be empty. It'll be sitting on something. I'll talk about that binding in just a moment. And of course that defaults to 0. Now, if we look over in the, I think it's in the, I forget where I put my resources sometimes. Let's take a look and see. Let's get rid of you so I can see it. This is the page where all that stuff exists. We've got a simple data template there, and it doesn't have very much stuff in it. And then we have a rich data template that's got quite a bit more. You can see it's got quite a bit more XAML in it. The individual stuff about the XAML is not that big a deal. It's just that one of them's got a lot and one of them doesn't have very much. And then I built in XAML one of those, an instance of that collection of data templates. And at this point, it has 2 items in it. It's got the simple template. And notice that I can set the template property to that resource that's above it. And then I've got another one for rich template, again set to the template that's right above it. So now I have a collection of things I can bind to my combo box. So let's go down to that combo box and see what it looks like. It's right here. Make this just a little bit bigger. So this combo box gets its data context from the available data templates, that list that I just showed you. And then the reason I do this here is so that I can do this, so that the selected index can come off of that default selected index, which is a property of that collection. That way, when the combo box starts up, it will have a selected item. And we'll see why that's important in just a moment. So that combo box then is bound to that collection, and now I have a data template that shows it. And it's actually pretty simple. It just says, yeah, I got a text block that holds a description, and I've got a content control that is grabbing a sample game record out of my app XAML. I'll show you that right here. I think it's here. It might have been. Yeah, there it is. Sample game record. And it's just got, it's just an instance of the data class. See, if I'm going to use a template, I got to have some data to put in it. So I just fudge one up in XAML. I've got a sample record. And then I tell that content control, there's your content, that's the data record. Here's the template that I want you to use to template it. So the content template of that content control reaches into the collection, the item in the collection, grabs the reference to the data template, and then every one of the items in the combo box now will have whatever template I assign to it. So they'll all have different templates. And as you can see, it would be pretty trivial to add some new templates to the list. All I have to do would be to create a new template and then add another item to the collection there. So I could have as many as I wanted. See, that's the sort of thing that it seems like a little thing in some respects, but you don't want your users kind of feeling your way through the different descriptions to figure out which template that they want. If they can look at it visually, they're much more likely to use that capability. I find that a lot of the capabilities we give users, my rule of thumb is this: if they can't figure out how to use it in 30 seconds, then the feature might as well not be there, because the bulk of users won't use it. So you want it to be transparently easy. Now, the reason we wanted the default index there was that that list box that's up at the top there actually is getting his selected index, he's getting his item template from the selected data template out of that combo box. So that means the list box that shows the things is bound to the combo box that shows the templates, and so when they pick a new template is picked, it's automatically put into as applied as the template for the box. So, have you ever thought about doing bindings that way to kind of put pieces together? See, you would probably, the bulk of XAML developers that I run into, would write a bunch of code behind to do that. Or they'd write some fancy classes or something that aren't needed, because I can do it all in XAML as long as I've got that one little simple collection. You guys are very quiet. It's like, is this like shell-shocked or something, or is this so obvious to you that you're not learning anything? You're riveted. I like that term, riveted. Let's see if I can show you another one. All right, this is my this example kind of puts it all together. Puts a lot of different interesting things together. So this composition is more of an advanced composition example. And I want to set the stage by telling you how this example came to be. I was doing a session on some of the advanced things you can do in XAML, and I wasn't really happy with some of my demo programs. They were okay, but I didn't feel, this is like 2015, but I felt like I could do better. So as I was drifting off to sleep, the idea came into my head. You guys have that experience? Yeah. And so I realized what the example needed to look like to show the things I wanted to show. And I got up in the morning before the session and built it in 90 minutes. So everything you see here is built in 90 minutes. Well, 10 minutes to kind of cut and paste things over into the Uno platform. So the basic idea with this is, okay, we've got this concourse. You could imagine an airport concourse. So it's like got blocks, and there's maybe a little blocks representing restrooms or something, and there's various gates. And there are planes at the different gates. The planes, as you might expect, come from a data list that you would get from some database. But in my case, of course, I fudged it up because I wanted to be able to transport the example very easily. So if I go over here, and you look at where's my, did I get anything in there? No, I'm on the wrong one. I'm on the fuel slider. Let's get to the right one. I need the planes and gates because it's already running. Yeah, it's running. Let me see if I can bring it up. There it is. So as you can see, you can pick something right there, and then you can say that you want that to go to a new gate, and it'll pop over there. So we can see we've got all our binding is working fine, and et cetera. I didn't take a lot of trouble to make this kind of a beautiful example because it's the illustration of the concepts that's more important. So let's poll the audience and see what you think about what I've got up here. The place where what's holding the planes and allowing you to select one. What control is used for that? List view, actually. Somebody said list box. Yeah, you ever think about a list box being used to display items like in some kind of real-world mapping arrangement and still be able to choose them? Yes, you can do that because a list box is dumb. All a list box knows how to do is grab data, you grab a template, put the two together, and put out the visual representation of a data item. That's all it knows how to do. Everything else is actually delegated to things inside the list box, including a panel. So the default panel is a stack panel, and it'll just merrily stack them up by default. But the list box doesn't care what kind of panel you use. So in this case, what panel am I using? I haven't heard the right answer yet, I don't think. I'm using a canvas. That allows me to precisely position the planes wherever I want them. So I'm going to kind of walk through some of the things in this to show you the different pieces and how they're put together. But keep in mind the idea that the list box has an items panel that is a canvas. We're also going to see some layering because The boxes that are the rectangles that are showing the concourse are not inside the list box. We're going to actually have two things layered on top of one another to get that effect. And then, of course, we have data templates that show planes. Where did I get the shape of the plane? Question for the audience. Sync Fusion, baby. If you go right there today, top in plane, you'll see that shape. And notice that I'm using transformations just like I did to flip the cow up and down. I've got a transformation that twists the plane, that gives it an angle so that it's always pointed toward the gate. I want you to notice one other little detail about this. The flight number is with the plane, but notice that the flight number is above the plane for the ones that are on the top, and it's below the plane for the ones that are on the bottom. You XAML guys, think a little bit about how I'd go about doing that. And see if you figure it out before I show it to you. Okay? Let's take a look at this guy now. Let's get some of our data classes out of the way so we kind of know what we got. Nothing very fancy there. If we look at over here in the shared section, we've got the plane and the collection of planes. The plane just has things like, what airline is it, what flight number is it, when does it depart, what gate's it at. And I do need property change stuff on the gate in order for it to move gates without anything special. So I need that, and of course I just have a plane collection. That's nothing more than an observable collection of planes. All right, and then of course I have to declare the plane somewhere right here instead of getting them from a database, because I don't usually do that in my samples. I've got a little declaration there. There's where my planes are. We should probably change this to see if this is actually being used. So let's change JetBlue to Air Canada. All right. So that's where my data is coming from. Naturally, in a real app, it'd come from something more dynamic, but that's good enough for now. Now let's take a look at the main page for this and walk through some of the things I've got. Again, make this just a little bit larger. Come here, baby. Yeah, something like that, a little bit larger. So you can see there are my, there's my concourse. You can see the concourse right here. I've got some converters I'm going to be talking about in a moment, which you could redo this to put a lot of this logic that's in the converters in a view model. If you had a view model, I didn't want to take the time to set that up. So I'm using converters, but I will show those in a moment. But first, let's kind of walk down through. You can see there, this canvas decides the layout of the concourse. Basically, it sits behind the list box that contains the planes at the gates. So that canvas is nothing but just a bunch of rectangles and text blocks, just to kind of get them all right. They're sitting on a canvas because that allows me the ability to position them. So we've got a canvas, and now this list box sits right on top of that canvas. This is the list box that's going to display the planes. Let's take a look at this list box. First of all, as I told you, he needs an items panel, which is a canvas. And he needs a data template. And there's the view box that's got all the stuff from Sync Fusion to make it look like a plane, with some bindings for things like the fill is bound to the departure type with a converter that will change the color of it based on how close it is to takeoff time. And then over there on the side, I have the plane's information. Now, as I told you, the data template is kind of standard except for one thing. Notice that there's a text block that holds, let me find it here, that's the plane view box. That's the, you see there's the airline, and there's the text box for that. This particular binding has his grid row bound to the gate number. And there's a converter that takes the gate number and tells you whether it should be in row 0 or row 2. You ever think about binding those attached properties to change the position of things based on data? Put things in different rows of grids. It works fine. Let's take a look at the data converters now, just to kind of walk down through them. They look about like what you'd expect. Because they're all fudged for a demo app, they'd be obviously be nicer in a production app. So there's the gate to grid row converter. Each gate has his grid row. And then we have the gate to horizontal position converter. And again, this could be more sophisticated in a real app, but gates 1 and 2 are only 10 over. 3 and 4 are 115 over, etc. And we also have one that positions things vertically. And there's another converter to get a brush depending on what the time to take off is. So let's run this again, do a quick summary of it, and then wrap up. By the way, I've used this technique of having a canvas inside of a list view or a list box for various things, including display of timelines. And then my value converters get fancy enough that I can compress and expand the timeline by feeding a scale factor to the value converter. So, data template, flight number and airline on top or on bottom. Shape comes from Metro Studio. Color comes from the value converter that takes the time and figures out how close it is to take off. And then all the bindings allow selection and allow movement of all these things. All right? So, that's a pretty cool demo, if I do say so myself. So if you want to get to compositional thinking in XAML, I suggest you design your UI by sketching with a pencil on blank paper, not a pen, and not paper that's lined. And then that will make it more likely for you to think up things you wouldn't think of otherwise. And then you think about combining the pieces you need to get the UI that you want. Thank you.